If your doll suffers from broken fingers or broken hands, well then this video is for you. Are you embarrassed to show your doll's hands because they're so wonky and look like noodles? Well, this is a video that shows you how to repair the fingers, at least the method that I use. And it should basically replace the wires with the original style of wire, thickness and all, and give you better articulation than what you see here. Now, of course, in this doll, she's pretty much brand new, and within a few weeks suffered 3 out of the 5 fingers the wires were broken, and they just look like noodles. In fact, the problem is you can't even straighten them out. As you see here, they basically turn around and they get all wonky, bent, look like noodles, and you just can't pose her anymore. And so you're basically saying, well, then what's the point? You know, if you want to have photography as your goal here, you can't show her hands. What I have found was this particular wire called Nitty wire is nickel titanium wire. It's heat sensitive, and it also can be bent thousands of times before snapping. In fact, I don't think you'll even have the patience to bend it that many times. And I have the link below, which shows you where to buy it from Amazon. And basically, to replace the original style of wire, you're going to basically create a mock-up of the articulation where those 3 things are basically the knuckles and the wire just feeds through them. Here's the stock wire, and you can see 6 or 7 bends, it snaps. And these were not exactly more than 90-degree bends either. They snap so easily. You can either purchase these knuckle pieces, which are just basically tubes. I just made them out of plastic because I have a printer and I have an SLA printer. So again, making them for me is very simple, but all you need to do is purchase tubing that has an inner diameter of at least 1 millimeter, which is the shaft diameter or the tubing diameter, and these pieces will glide over the wire. So this is going to give you your knuckle, basically, or your somewhat mocked up articulation. It'll give you close to what a real articulated hand would be if you were to buy them from the factory. Additionally, why don't I just go buy an entire assembly? Well, because it costs a lot of money, and B, the stock hands may not accommodate the large diameter metal parts that are in this aftermarket hand. You may not be able to slide it inside the hand because it's really designed or poured for a very small diameter wire. Good luck getting that inside the fingers. I'm not the first to have tried that, and I have not succeeded with that because you'll have to butcher the hand to get these large articulated aftermarket hands in there. With my silicone doll here, it does not stretch that easily, and it's extremely difficult to get the wire inside the fingers. So what you have to basically do is you have to prepare these little plastic pieces, and you assemble them, glue them in place, and then you insert them in the hand, and it'll glide inside the finger. So check this out. This wire is this nickel titanium wire. It's heat sensitive to a certain, what they call a temperature at which it uncoils. What I mean by that is basically if you bend the finger and it becomes really wonky, you just apply a heat gun. In this case, it's anything above 40 degrees Celsius is a transition temperature for this wire. And I'm not exactly aiming it really well here, but when I do aim it on the flame, you can see it just snaps into like this straight piece that it was originally made. It's perfectly straight. So if your finger wires ever get damaged or get bent out of shape because you had a problem, you just apply a blow dryer and it'll straighten out the finger. This stuff can be bent, as I said, a lot, and I don't think you'd ever experience this breakage that you'd see with the stock. So this is a good substitute for the stock wire, and it'll give you functionality that you may not have had before. So I think this is a good idea. It's relatively cheap. Wire is about 20 bucks for a meter, and that should be enough for at least for 10 fingers. So on we go to the next part. So I just want to give you some more, kind of, this is a really cool thing to see the wire uncoil You can see me bending it here, 45-degree or so bends. And I was really fascinated by the flame cooking the wire and just unfolding it, and it just seems to be the best idea I've seen. And on the doll forum, somebody had proposed this, and I followed up on it just to give it a go to see whether or not it can be used in doll fingers. And indeed, I have been very happy to say that this is probably the best intermediate solution, barring, if you wanted to buy articulated hands, that's your best choice. But like I said, it does cost a few bucks more than some wire, and it may not fit inside a doll hand. So just be wary of that. This is probably the easiest way to replace the wires. Now, you want to assemble these little tubes over where your doll hand. So you'd want to use her hand as a template. I use my own hand because it's kind of similar in some ways, but you want to just size it up properly. And I think you can use either Gorilla Glue or Crazy Glue to get these pieces glued together. The end digit you see that I'm holding right there needs to be there, because otherwise it's not going to fall inside, or at least you can't thread it inside the finger, because the finger is like this sticky noodle, and it's very difficult to get the wire threaded through, or at least pushed through a hole that you can't even see. So you end up getting finger pokes. So that little plastic piece at the end is actually really useful as a guide. You can kind of see how it can be used as an articulated system. It's simple in design, it does seem to work. And of course it won't ever loosen up, which is kind of another neat feature of this idea. Your hands, the doll hands, probably will now outlast her, I'm happy to say. So here's what she looks like. Yeah, it looks really terrible. I cannot even pose her. I'm so embarrassed about it too. But it's not your fault, right? I mean, this thing happens because it's a manufacturing defect. These are made to be basically, the cheapest way possible for these guys who make these dolls for their revenue. But you ultimately end up getting stuck with a $3,000 doll that has wonky fingers. Anyway, what I was trying to do here is trying to figure out where the palm plate is, and at least where it ends, and use a pair of sharp scissors and try to create as much of a straight line when you cut. And what you'll notice is when you get kind of into the material where the palm plate begins, you'll have like this white gauze that's stuck onto the metal. This obviously is there to prevent serration and damage to the silicone, or in this case, in other cases, would be TPE. So it just prevents that sharp metal from piercing the sensitive portion of the hand, especially if you have her hand resting on something when she's like on her hands and knees. That's where you can get these so-called palm plate damage. So you can see there's little tubes from the stock, and they're still okay because they're unlikely to break, but you have to really look at, in your case, what has broken. If they don't have these little tubes, these little look like little bendable lantern neck tubes, then it'll probably need to be glued in there, so the wires will have to have some kind of adapter. So in the next video where I actually did the other hand, I described how I actually made an adapter to fit over that palm plate where the wires can be stuck and glued in. In this case, those tubes seem to be okay. I'm not saying that they're perfect, but at least it's the least amount of damage and custom work that you'd need to do. So again, we just don't want to go into a overboard video where it's going to be extremely hard for someone to make and follow. This is supposed to be just an easy way of fixing fingers, and it sure can be better if you're going to use a real articulated system, if you can find them and make them fit inside this little hand. But you can see the way I'm pulling out the little broken finger wires. You just kind of have to pinch the finger to pull it out, otherwise the hand or the finger can just wrap and become inverted, and you don't want to damage, obviously, or snap the finger in two either. So just be a little bit careful there. You can see how hard it is to pull that wire out. It actually took a little force. So just imagine how hard it is going to get the wire, the original wire or the new wire in there. It's like threading a needle, but blind, you know. I'm saying this is difficult. So this system where you put the plastic pieces over the wire helps guide it through, and I found it works quite well. You can sort of see the openings of the where the wires were. They're very small. They're maybe 3 millimeters, 4 millimeters in diameter at the very most. So I was doing a lot of experimentation with how to fit the wire through. I tried different ideas, and this is one of the first takes I did where I just inserted the wire this way without a end cap, end tube, and it was just a little tricky to get the wire really to follow the hole all the way to the tip. You'd end up poking the wire through the hand, and so it was like, yeah, that wasn't probably the best idea. So this is really kind of unedited in a sense that I'm just trying different ideas. So I said, okay, if those things don't work, what if I just put a regular wire through? Would that be something I can thread through and I can feel it better? And in some cases it does work, but you can see it just bends in my hand, and it becomes wonky. So ultimately the solution was to use these tubes, these plastic pieces, as they stiffen up the finger wire quite well. And here I'm just trying to size it up by using a marker to see approximately what size length finger wire I might need. So here's just a sample test where I would push that sample piece through and see if it actually does work, and yeah, it seems to be really good. It does bend, and it's a lot better than it used to be. I'll just tell you that. You know, dolls today, some of the higher end ones do come with articulated hands, and I would recommend those if you're a photographer. And in general, this saves a lot of headache. But for a lot of us that don't have dolls with articulated systems, these built in are, you know, this is the one option you might have if you ever do replace the fingers. This wire is probably your best bet. So you might think, well, why not just get a thicker wire, because you wouldn't have to worry about the articulation, you know, basically the tubes that I'm covering up with over the wire. Well, what happens is if you go thicker than 1 millimeter, the amount of bends it takes to snap the wire goes down. So instead of, you know, bending it 1,000 or 2,000 times, you might get several hundred bends of 2 millimeter thick wire. And if you go to 3 millimeter thick wire, again, it goes down before it snaps. So it's been really proven that this wire of 1 millimeter is as thick as you want to go. And you can see it just cuts with a pair of wire cutters or any other cutters, steel cutters, that would just get it to size. Here's a couple fingers I just made already. And of course, like I said, if they get all wonky, you just apply in this case, this is a heat gun. It's like a blow dryer. In this case, it's just enough to get it straightened out. In case that your finger wire does end up getting all wonky, this is one way of fixing the finger really quickly. Just put a little bit of heat on the finger and her fingers will straighten out. You cannot do this with stock, obviously, because they don't have this transition temperature. And you can look at that, it's just straight as an arrow now. So obviously get this from Amazon. I found that other places online take literally a month before they ship you the product. So Amazon ships it within like 2 or 3 days, and you get a meter of it, and I think that's the way to do it. Here's me just cutting the plastic to size. Just file the end down. I think if, you know, just prevent any sharp edges from piercing the skin, just bevel it out a little bit. I do lots of hobby and arts and crafts stuff, so I have the printer for doing other things too. And it serves so many purposes in life. They're really useful. It's like a general tool that you have, like a grinding wheel or a drill set or something. So I'm using basically this idea that I've come across on the internet, using articulated style of fingers. We're using the tubes that I'm showing here to give you the effect of knuckles. If you did not use these, your wires would bend very smoothly with a small radius, and it would look like the stock wires would bend. It's not that natural. This gives you that best compromise as far as I can tell. I'm pretty happy with this, the way it came out. And I believe I will continue doing this unless there's a better way. In the future, I think this is the simplest and cheapest way of repairing these hands. So you might ask, why is there a part 2 video if it's so simple? Well, that was the idea, was to have it all in one video. Unfortunately, on her right hand, the palm plate happened to snap in my hand. It snapped while I was bending her wrist. Without cutting or anything, just bending her wrist normally as you normally would, it snapped in two. That was a bit of a shock. I'm not that strong. But I happened to snap a piece of steel that was an eighth of an inch thick. Well, when you look at the steel that they provide in these skeletons, it's not really good quality. It's basically like pig metal. It's just this very crappy, they say stainless steel, but there's a lot of types of steel that are very soft. And I think this is one case where, to make it well and easily weldable, it would be easy for them to manufacture these skeletons, because they're probably a little cheaper. These are not high-grade stainless steel by any means. It wouldn't cost this price range. Here I'm just putting a little bit of glue to just create the bond basically between these edges and between the two knuckles here. And I'll continue putting more glue down, and I'll space them out as needed. But you only need about 3 or 4 millimeters for what would be basically your tendon. Or in this case, I think it would be the space between the two knuckles, right? So you basically have ligaments there. In this case, sorry, that would be ligaments, yeah. So you would basically simulate that effect of the bend. And that gives you a pretty decent representation of what a actual bend would look like inside the doll hand. Notice the wires are very straight. This would be somewhat difficult to do if they were obviously bent, because you cut them and they bent by natural means, and then you would be stuck with that bend for life, because you can't straighten out wire yourself without any other equipment. Here it just requires some heat. So I used a combination of crazy glue. I tried crazy glue here. It does work really well. And also Gorilla Glue. But obviously the crazy glue here I'm showing you here is a little bit I think it's still Gorilla Glue, but the crazy glue just cements it really quickly, and sometimes might be preferable. I don't exactly remember how long these sat around. Maybe for a few hours, until they got to the point where I could actually insert them in the hand. But it gives you enough time to space out the pieces as you need. So everything you see here, I'm just going by a basic idea of what I'm trying to achieve, and just basically to be able to reinsert these fingers somehow, and have it work as well as it can. So those are some adapters I was looking at. 3D printed those. This was certain ideas. This was another idea here, was to make this kind of adapter to fit in between those little bendable hose things you see there, and gives you a bit of a more of a thicker palm plate, and that's what's shown there. So I inserted that piece in there, and then the wires would fit inside the those hose, the stock hoses that you see, and just glued in with a Gorilla Glue. So to insert the wire into the finger cavity is just a matter of just wiggling it and just feeling it through like you would trying to get something tight fitting through. It just takes a little bit of time, but it actually works surprisingly well. So the actual, if you did not use these tubes and just use the wire, you would have almost no success getting the wire through, unless you have very thick wire. So it just takes a little bit of time. You just basically have the wire long enough so that you can reinsert it in the stock tubes that are there in the palm plate. This will give you give you some rigidity in the hand as well, unlike what was shown in the stock hand where it was like a floppy noodle. That just didn't look so real at all. Surprisingly, these are not cheap dolls. I think they retail for up in the high 2000 range. But the fact is they break so easily just alarms me. In this case, I think this doll had broken the neck, is the back nut, which is a nut they provide from the factory so you can suspend the doll, actually snapped. I think the welds broke off. And also in this one, the shoulder and elbow came loose. Easy to fix, obviously. Just make an incision, and you will have to break the nut. There's a nut there that is welded, so that prevents it from coming loose. But it's quite easy to get those loose with a little cut-off wheel. Even a Dremel might be able to do it. And just use an Allen key to retighten, and then you can use some kind of JB weld or Loctite to prevent the nuts from coming loose. But with any type of surgery, it's sort of unpredictable what will happen. It might seem this is what you're going to have. In some other dolls, you don't even have a palm plate, and the wires are essentially all bundled together and attached to the wrist. Those type of hands, I think, are just pure garbage. They're early generation, and you should never buy a doll that has basically wires all the way up to the wrist. You should be able to get a doll with a palm plate at the very least. But it's also possible that you can fabricate your own system, but again, it's a lot of work. And it's probably beyond the scope of a lot of people without specialized tools. So here I got the last little piece. I'm trying to figure out whether the last piece is even needed. This is mostly for just stiffening up the palm a little bit more. And it looks like it probably wasn't needed, but I don't know. Maybe I think in this case I just cut it a little bit less length, and that pretty much was all I needed to do. So there's not one right recipe for fixing these. It's just basically this is the idea that I used behind the concept of getting the hand repaired. So when you repair yours, you might have an entirely different palm attachment, and that depends on the manufacturer. So in this case, yeah, it's actually looking quite good. I was quite happy with the results, and it gives her a whole new lease on life. So here I'm just kind of thinking about how to attach the wires, getting some ideas to how to bundle them together with glue or a piece of 3D printed material. For the other hand, obviously I had to fabricate an entire piece of metal palm plate, and that's why the other video, part 2, will come up next, and it'll give you a sort of a comprehensive idea. If you had to make a new palm plate, what's involved? It's more certainly than this, because you do need some tools for making these pieces of metal. You can see how that really goes in some cases really easily. You can see that piece is just going right through the little cavity of the finger. Ultimately, this procedure took several days since I was doing this for the first time. And also there's another day you need to actually glue back the palm. So being this is silicone, you will have to use some kind of silicone adhesive. With TPE, it's typically done with heat. And you can use 3M primer adhesive. It might work in this case, but that's a matter of how big the hole is and how well you seal it up. It may or may not seal properly with TPE, but using a heat gun and a soldering station, you might be able to weld back the palm pretty well, I think. So here I am, I'm just inserting those little plastic pieces, just trying to get an idea of how to get the wires in there. It's a little tricky because there's a sharp radius and they're a little hard to thread through because you have to bend them pretty well. Those silver pieces from the original hand, I mean. And once it goes through, eventually, it'll just be in there permanently, and you can just use a little bit of glue to keep it in place. This is a DIY, do-it-yourself kind of idea that is not above most people's ability, I think. It just takes time, and just take it slow and just think the problem through. Here I got 5 fingers to deal with, and when I pull one finger out, some of the other ones pop out again. So I had to kind of work it out one at a time and hold the other ones in there and problem solve it. Okay, here I'm just gluing, using a little bit of crazy glue there. This is a particular crazy glue that is called a professional grade. You can buy it from certain stores like I think Lowe's has it. But just be very careful with this crazy glue, is that it'll stick to your hand and it'll put you in the emergency real quick. If you stick your fingers together, there's no separating them with this glue. Typical crazy glues that you find are general purpose and don't bond as tightly or as well as this one. This is why I use this professional grade stuff. So to clean the incision, I use acetone. And acetone for silicone is recommended. And for TPE dolls, you can also use acetone, but just be careful not to use too much, and because it will loosen and weaken the TPE. But you have to clean the material first before you glue it. You want to glue it. In this case, acetone does a remarkably good job. None of these adhesives for silicone will work if there's any grease. So here I got a little creative and tried to figure out how to glue the hand back. I needed a way of holding it tight, and saran wrap wouldn't really work too well here. So what I decided to do was to use a piece of post from a stand, and once I glue the hand, it'll be permanently in that position, and it will solidify like that. It'll be fine. So the hand will be perfectly sealed up. Obviously, I can't stand there for 12 hours to facilitate this procedure, but I just want to have a way of leaving it overnight like this so it will bond properly and be repaired the next day. One thing about Permatex is you need to put some kind of saran wrap on the end when you finish using the tube, and to put it sealed in the freezer. Don't leave it at room temperature. It'll end up eventually hardening up the whole tube. So the trick is put it in the freezer and let it sit there all the time until you need it. And then it will stay unsolidified for essentially forever until you run out of it. So I just use a little Q-tip here to assist in the applying of the adhesive. Now it's not toxic to what I can tell. It's a acetic acid based adhesive, but I always wash my hands anyway when I'm finished with it. So here I'm trying to find a way of sealing up the suture or the hand, the wound, and eventually I will try to see if I can get rid of the this incision by using makeup powder, which is about the same color as a very light blush. And if you just sprinkle the powder and paint it on the wound, it'll blend in really well and you won't see the incision. And this is the way I get rid of the cuts, and that's pretty much the procedure for this hand, as you can see. So pretty happy with the result. This is the basic idea is if you have a large incision, you would want to use saran wrap. This is the actual what is some of the preview of the part 2 video where I had to make a new palm plate. But to make something to seal up silicone at this amount of cutting, you have to use a lot of saran and basically wrap it around real tight, and therefore the glue would bond a lot better. It's pretty tricky, and you'll almost invariably have seams in the end result. But if you do it gradually like this, you might want to just glue a little piece at a time. Or in my case, I was just trying to get it all done in one shot, but trying to get it just assembled back bit by bit and then eventually seal her hand up. If I can manage it, that would be the ideal thing. So of course, when you seal one end, the other end still has to be pushed in and has to be matched to the other part of the incision. And so here I am just demonstrating the makeup kit. This is just a foundation kit, and I just sprinkle the powder on the wound area, and then it'll just blend in, and you'll hardly see anything. And of course, this also get rid of the glossiness of the adhesive. You can use any type of baby powder, and that will definitely help eliminate some of the shine. But I usually would let the adhesive work for a few hours and then sprinkle some baby powder at the end. So when it's all said and done, this is what we end up with. So you can see the wires are straight. The incision is very minimal. It's still there, but it's a lot better than it used to be. The fingers are now straight. They can be bent. And I'm pretty happy to say that was a very good ultimate solution to a doll that had wonky and very damaged hands. You can see when they bend pretty well. I'm not trying to do anything drastic with the bending, but again, you get the idea that they do bend. And ultimately, you can do nice poses again, and everything's good with the photography. So I think that really wraps up the video. And next video will be part 2, which will describe the more extensive repair due to the mechanical failure of the part. All right, thanks for watching. Until next time.